Let's take a look at this question where we want to find the output for this program. So here we created a class called value, and the first thing we're doing in this class is we created two instance variables a and b of the double data type. We have two constructors of the class. We have one constructor that takes no parameters, and we have another constructor that takes two double values as the parameters. We have a display method, and finally we have our main method. So since the execution always starts from the main method, we're going to start executing from the main method. We're going to start with the first statement of our main method. The first statement of our main method is creating an object VAL of this class value. And this part of the object creation statement is going to call the constructor. So here, since I'm not passing any parameters, we're going to call a constructor that takes no parameters. In this class, we only have one constructor that takes no parameters. So we're going to be calling this constructor, and we're going to be executing this constructor. This variable VAL has its own versions of the instance variables a and b. And this constructor is going to initialize the variables. So here we're first setting the variable a to 3.0. So the value of the variable a will be 3.0. And then we're initializing b to 2.5. So we're setting b to 2.5. We've initialized the variables a and b of this object VAL. Since we finished executing this constructor, we're going to go back to where the constructor was called. The constructor was called here, so we're going to go back to that point. After this statement, we're going to go to the next statement of our main method. In the second statement of the main method, we're creating another object called VAL2. This is also an object of the value class. So we're creating this object called VAL2. Since this is a different object, it has its own versions of the instance variables. So it has its own version of the variable a, it also has its own version of the variable b. Even though I've initialized the variables a and b of this object VAL, I haven't yet initialized the variables a and b of this object VAL2. In the object creation statement, we're calling a different constructor because we're passing parameters here. So we're looking for a constructor that takes two double values as the parameters. We have a constructor in our value class that takes two double values as our parameters. So we're going to be calling that constructor. The first parameter is 2.1. So we're going to set the first variable to 2.1. The second parameter is 4.5. So we're going to set our second variable to 4.5. X is going to be 2.1 and Y is going to be 4.5. Then inside this constructor, we're going to initialize the variables a and b of this object VAL2. We're going to set a to x. Since x is 2.1, we're just setting a to 2.1. And then we're setting b to y. Since y is 4.5, we're setting b to 4.5. The object VAL has different values for the variables a and b, and the object VAL2 has different values for the variables a and b. Since we finished executing this constructor, we're again going to go back to where the constructor was called. That's this statement, so we're going to go back to this statement. After creating this object, we're going to move on to the third statement of our main method. Here, using the first object VAL, we're calling the display method of the value class. Since I'm calling the method, I'm going to go and execute this method display. In the display method, we have a variable called max. This is a variable of the double data type. And we're setting this to math.max a, b. Basically, we're using the max method of the math class to find the larger value in the variables a and b. Since I'm calling the display method using the VAL object, we're going to be using the variables a and b of the VAL object. A is 3.0 and b is 2.5. So here we're just checking math.max 3.0, 2.5. Here 3.0 is obviously larger. So this method is going to return 3.0, and we're going to store 3.0 in the variable max. So the variable max Then the println statement is just printing the value in the variable max. Since we've stored 3.0, this is just going to print 3.0. On your output window, you're going to see 3.0 as the output. With this, we complete executing this method display. So we're going to go back to where the method was called. We're going to go back to this third statement of our main method. After this, we're going to execute the last and final statement of the main method, where we're using the second object val2 to call the display method. Since we're calling the display method again, we're going to go back to the display method. So we're going to go back to the display method. And now we have the same block of code. We have a variable called max, and we're setting this to math.max a comma b. But now you have to be careful. Since I'm using val2, the values of the variables a and b are different. val2 has its own version of the variables a and b. We've already initialized a to 2.1 and b to 4.5. So here math.max a comma b is using different values of a and b. I can just rewrite this as math.max 2.1 comma 4.5. 4.5 is larger, so this whole statement is going to return 4.5, and we're going to set the max variable to 4.5. So the value of the max variable is going to be 4.5. After this, when we print the variable max, we're just going to see a 4.5 on our output window. We're going to print 4.5. Since we finished executing the display method, we're going to go back to where the method was called. That's this last statement. And with this, we reach the end of the main method. So 3.0 and 4.5 should be the final output of this program. And you can see that if I run this same program in my code editor, we get the exact same output that we predicted. We get 3.0 and 4.5.